Hi, and welcome back to Control Alt Delete. Today I have with me Craig Crownover, one of our members, and he's here to talk to us a little bit about faith. This text from Matthew is a real interesting one where John the Baptist seems to have a lot of doubts, and you can understand from the situation that he is in prison, probably not like today's prisons, which would not be pleasant, and yet this is probably more like dungeon, without food type of prison, most likely. So he comes to Jesus with a great number of doubts, sends his disciples, "Are you the one?" And Jesus talks about himself. But Craig, could you talk to us about, if even someone as great as John the Baptist could have doubts, we could all have doubts. Could you talk to us about how our doubts manifest themselves in our lives today?
Yeah, sure. I agree with you. If someone like a John the Baptist, and certainly many others in the Bible, right, Old through New Testament, struggle with doubt. We certainly do. But yet we have this, I think, sometimes spoken, most often unspoken expectation we're not supposed to, and we're bad Christians if we have doubts. That there must be something wrong with my faith, or I've done something wrong, or God isn't who he really said he was, right? So, so can those be there? Sure. And I think they can show up maybe differently at different times in our lives, right, depending on our age and circumstances. But I think there are some common threads, too, that people can experience. And I think when we are facing that, what you call the dark night of the soul, right? So it's one thing to know the promises of God, and it's another thing to be in that struggle where you really have to trust those, right? It's not an intellectual exercise anymore, and you're personally experiencing those troubles. And there's a phrase I've heard that we should not doubt in the night what we heard in the light, right? And the idea there is that we come to worship, we read the Bible, we hear the promises, but when we get to that dark night of the soul, we often say, well, are those promises still really true? Well, there's only one way to know, and that's to go through those times. But I think the way it can manifest itself is through expectations not being met. I think we can have doubt when we expected certain answers from God, or that if I as a parent do certain things, my kids will behave certain ways. Or if I do my work a certain way, I won't lose my job. And so we set expectations, some of which are not really promised in the Bible, right? And yet we put those expectations on ourselves, on others, and on God, and when they're not met, we doubt, right? Did we really, is God who he says he is? And are his promises true? I think another way that I found that it's happened to me, and that is when we compare ourselves to others and their circumstances. And we say, hey, why are they not going through what I'm going through? How come I'm the one suffering here? And does that mean somehow my faith is weaker, or are they more favored by God? Or whatever, we can put into that. And it might look different for different folks, but I think this idea of we compare our circumstances to others, and then we begin to doubt, gosh, if we're not getting blessed that way, if we're not getting results like them, then maybe those things aren't true for us.
Right.
Or maybe something's wrong with me. And so I think there's just a couple of ways, those are a couple of ways I can think of that, doubt manifests itself in our lives.
Sure. So when we're facing those doubts, what do we do?
Yeah, good question. Run and hide. Sometimes shake our fist at God, right? I mean, to be honest, when we face those, I think there's a mix of things, and there's healthy things we can do, and there's unhealthy things, and I've done them all, right?
Okay.
Yeah, right. So I think, to be honest, and as it turns out, right now, the last few years have been one of the more tough times in my life, right? One of the most difficult for a variety of reasons, including my mom's death and some family issues and work issues. So it was sort of that perfect storm, right? Work, family, another situation. So it made me have to really think about how do I get through that. And I think there are basics that we can take for granted in the day-to-day, but God gives principles in the world for how the world works. You got the sun and the moon, and it creates a certain order to life and how things work. And God mostly, though he does miracles, he mostly just provides for us through this natural, normal kind of order of the world.
Okay.
Well, I think he does that spiritually. He provides for us through things like the Word, right? Through worship and through prayer. And we can get into a ritual for those things, or just kind of turn the crank and not think much about them, but they're real, they're valuable, and they make the difference, always. So we think about the Word, that's where we get reminded of stories like John the Baptist, who doubted, or Abraham, who doubted, or Job, or Joseph, or the disciples, right? So we get reminded, I'm not alone.
Right.
So I like going to Scripture to be reminded I'm not alone, and that others, God has always been faithful. He'll be faithful again.
Yeah.
The second way is prayer, and that's just talking to God. And it's not for me, it's when I'm driving, it's as I'm walking. I just think about God, and then things become a prayer, and I just ask Him about stuff. And sometimes argue with Him, to be honest, and sometimes have not even respected God the way I should, just because I'm human, right? And I wrestle and get upset with what He's doing or not doing.
Right.
But I bring it all to Him,
Yeah.
right? Because He knows it anyway.
Yeah.
Right? So I do that. And the last thing is that worship, and combined with that is, I'd say, small groups, right? It's that fellowship of believers with others who can encourage us. So, our friend Tony Batesell's used that term, the fix is in the mix.
Right.
I love that because it's in the mix of our engagement with other believers that strengthens us. And frankly, their faith holds me up when mine's been too weak.
Yeah.
And so I think it's all of those things are the things I try to do, and don't always do them as well as I'd like, right? But by staying connected in those ways, worship, and fellowship and prayer, those are the things I do to deal with the doubts that do come.
Sure. Great. One last question. How have you seen God's hand when you've doubted?
Well, so by being connected in the ways I was describing, a lot of times, what I like to do is I like to listen to contemporary Christian music right on the radio, but I also like hymns as well. So I have, a lot of times for me, God speaks to me through words and through the words of songs. So it's incredible how frequently God has brought a new song or a reminder of a song, and those words within it that were the encouragement I needed right then and there for that day, and sometimes to get through the next moment, right? And so He has a way of doing that, but it was staying plugged in and tuned in, right, to hear that, and staying in worship, to hear those songs and be reminded. So I've seen God work that way. I've seen people out of the blue mention things like, I was thinking about you. I'm wondering how you were doing. My sister was doing that recently.
Wow.
And that check-in just kind of stops me, like, how'd you know, right, that, that was going on. So I see God's providential care through others, through music, through sermons, right? And I think we've all had that experience, where, gosh, does Pastor know what I'm going through? How is he speaking right to me?
Is he looking at me right now?
Yeah, is he looking at me right now? And so I think, it's amazing that God works those ways, and I experienced that. And most recently, a particular issue was flying out and taking care of my mom, and she was terminally ill. And I reached a low point personally, professionally, and obviously with my mom's health, that I was on a plane, and I thought so many things had been going wrong that I had gotten to the point where I thought, God must be upset with me. I must have done something wrong. Now, I've been a Christian a long time, and I intellectually know that's not sound theologically.
Right.
But I couldn't help feeling that way and doubting His real care at that time. Yeah. And so what I ended up somehow, I can't remember, I somehow got connected to a devotional on the airplane, on my phone.
Oh,
right?
Wow.
And it was from Charles Spurgeon, and he has a devotion called Morning and Evening, and it was one, I think, for July 11th. And he reminded us that God's care and God's proof that He's concerned with us is that He uses suffering in His children's lives. So it reminded me of 1 Peter 5 and Hebrews chapter 11 and 12, where God says His children are the ones He disciplines. And that discipline is not fun, it's not enjoyable, but afterwards it yields this peaceful fruit of righteousness. And he said, the mark of you knowing you're my child is that I'm going to be correcting you and working with you.
Wow.
If you got the easy life and nothing ever happens, that, it's like, whoa, maybe that's where you got to be wondering. No, just kidding. I don't want to go too far with that, but you get the idea. But you get the idea that the mark of God working through us is that just like he used suffering in Jesus' life, he will use suffering in our life. And that's not a mark of his disfavor. It's actually proof that he is intimately, shaping us.
So our sufferings are not a reason for us to doubt.
Correct.
But to continue to trust.
To continue to trust,
to,
right.
To build us toward more trust.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and he may have tested us in smaller things, and he's been faithful in the small things. He'll be faithful in the big thing. But it's also why we got to go back to Scripture, because we're going to experience big things we have no experience with.
Right.
And we're going to feel alone. So we need to go back and see someone like a Joseph. Wow. I mean, you think about what he went through, and you put yourself in that position, you go, my goodness, right? That's tremendous pressure to doubt, and yet he stayed faithful. So God helped him. He'll help me, even though I haven't been through this before.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Gary.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Enjoy your discussion.